Tuesday, September 27, 1966. Discourse on the Bhagavad Gita.
We were discussing the chapter on meditation from the Gita. Last Tuesday we discussed what are the qualifications necessary for meditative life and some hints about how to meditate. After hearing these things in the Gita, Arjuna asked a question which is common to almost all of us. He said, and he gave a very vivid description of what happens. He said, what you have said about meditation, how to meditate, it is all right. But we find the mind is so restless. You have talked of meditation which will give serenity of mind. We find that it is impossible to have any serenity of mind, nor do I find that there is a possibility of making the mind serene. Mind is so turbulent, mind is so strong, mind is so obstinate. It is difficult to control the mind as much it is difficult to stop the blowing wind, as it were. It is impossible, I consider, to have control over our minds. That is the condition of the mind, general condition of the mind for average run of persons. And therefore, Arjuna asked this most important question, and he gives a vivid description. He said it is as difficult as to stop the blowing wind, or in Bengal say, to tie the wind with a rope. It might be possible to tie the blowing wind with a rope, but it seems impossible to control the mind. That is the real trouble. Arjuna asked in the second chapter a similar question. Some of the questions Arjuna asked are so important, so pertinent. In the second chapter he asked the similar question. Led by whom our mind goes astray. Forcibly as it were, some power takes our mind on a wrong direction. In the battlefield, the leader of the opposite party, Duryodhana, though he is described as living a very vicious life, he had also his moments of spiritual sense. In one of his prayers, he said, I know what is right, but my mind does not go that way. I know what is wrong, but my mind goes that way. I cannot control my mind. This is not only Duryodhana asked that question. Saint Paul said this similar thing. I know what is right, the same thing, but I cannot control the mind. I know what is wrong, but my mind goes that way. If we become a little introspective, we find that is the root cause of all troubles in the mind, all troubles in our life. Because the trouble begins in the mind. In the UNESCO, United Nations, in UNESCO, in the introduction they wrote, the war begins in the minds of men. So you cannot control the war, you cannot. because the root cause is in the mind. The war begins in the trouble in the minds of men. Eternal war is going on, conflict in our minds. Fundamental problem of the world as of our personal lives is how to control the mind. In Gita, in another chapter, it is said, even a person, if he struggles hard, his mind sometimes goes wrong. In the Gita, it was said not only to frighten people, just to caution people to be careful, to be ready for long spiritual practice. Just giving a realistic picture, not simply to dupe you. So in Gita it is said in another chapter. In Chondi, a book devoted to Divine Mother, there the similar thing we find. There it is said, even a person who is seemingly wise or wise in the ordinary sense, his mind also behaves that way. That perforce is as it were, one's mind goes in the wrong direction. Though not always, but when it goes in the wrong direction, very few persons can control it. So Arjuna asked that question. And here he asked Sri Krishna as Krishna, "Oh Krishna, tell me what to do." Krishna really means, from one sense, Krishna means dark, because the complexion of Krishna was blue, and he was called Krishna means dark. But Krishna has another meaning. Krishna, from the root meaning, Krishna, one who takes away our difficulties. So here's Arjuna in a pathetic situation, as it were. Krishna was his friend. Once when he was in difficulty, faced with the war, there he said in a very piteous condition, "I do not know what is right, what is wrong. I am in confusion. I am like a disciple to thee. Just let me know what is right. No longer freedom of thought, complete surrender. Teach me, tell me what is right." Yes, when mind gives us trouble, we find it is extremely difficult to know what is right. That is the point where one gets conversion, as the Christian says. Mind takes a different turn. When one has become extremely helpless, really one feels one's helplessness, and one longs for a saving hand. If you are really helpless, then the saving hand comes. It came to Arjuna. Here again, Arjuna says, after hearing the discourses for 6 chapters, he comes to the same point. And here in a helpless condition, he says, "I take refuge in thee." One who takes away our difficulties, one who solves our problems. He is our refuge, our shelter. So he says, "I take refuge in thee. Let me know or what is the solution." Mind is such. And Sri Krishna replies, "Undoubtedly mind is so. It is difficult to control the mind, but it can be controlled. The secret is you have to do practice. Through persistent practice and keeping the mind alert, through persistent practice and a discrimination, mind can be controlled. Not that mind cannot be controlled, but these are the methods. Persistent practice and always to keep the mind alert. Constant self-examination, constant discrimination. What is right and what is wrong? If you constantly discriminate, if you constantly examine what is right, what is wrong, then gradually mind will take another turn. When there is something wrong, then one will be cautious, at once alert. that this is the wrong thing. Many persons do not think at all what is right or wrong. And the result is the thing, wrong thing to be right. Just go the other way. Just go to the wrong path. Absolutely no understanding. They take the wrong thing to be right. If you talk them of religion, they will say there is no need for that. We can go on well without God. Religion is otherworldliness. It does not contribute anything to our worldly success. Not that one should not live in the world and try to live comfortably so that one can think, one can have higher thinking. Not that. Nobody objects to that. But life must have its purpose. Life is not meaningless. People make it meaningless because they do not think in terms of any higher ideal. They think pleasure is everything that counts in life, and worldly success. When worldly success becomes the criterion of one's life, or it becomes the goal of one's life, naturally there will be conflict in one's mind, there will be conflict in the country, there will be conflict in the world. That is the trouble. But people think all do that. So let us consider that this is the right. Right thing is not determined, never by a majority of votes. Swami Vivekananda once said, majority are in the wrong, because people follow the majority of opinions. But still the world in such a condition. So we are accustomed to think just in the reverse way, not in a higher idealism. Give freedom to the mind. Don't suppress the mind, it is suppression. See, it is said, to avoid the temptation is simply to succumb to it. They will think that is the easiest way. You have not to exert anything. Give mind a free rein. And give the mind a free rein, it is something like riding a wild horse, unbroken horse. Naturally, the life will suffer a shipwreck. Sri Krishna says that this is the condition of the mind, but it can be controlled by persistent practice and discrimination. Discrimination means constantly to think to what is right and what is wrong. Constant self-examination, alertness. Upanishad says, important things to have alertness. Buddha said, you must have a constant vigilance. If you are not vigilant, you'll ruin your spiritual life. In one of the scriptures in the Mahabharata, it is said, negligence, rather the lack of vigilance is death. But vigilance is life. Buddha said that you must be constantly vigilant, what is right and what is wrong. Afterwards, the mind will be so trained, as soon as the tendency of the mind to go wrong, you are alert, you are alerted. And because you have done practice, so when mind is alerted, you can take steps. A great saint was asked that what happened with his mind, whether he has any problem. And he said, yes, but when it comes even in a subtle state, it does not take shape. So it was registered in the mind. Then it can be controlled. The practice, the mind is on our control to a great extent. So as long as there be human body, or unless one is completely transformed, vigilance is extremely necessary. And with vigilance, we grow in our spiritual life. Buddha said, drop by drop, if water continuously falls, soon a big tank will be filled up with water. In the same way, there might be a very big tank filled up with water. If there is the slightest leak, then sooner or later, the whole tank will be emptied of water. In the same way, in spiritual life, if one is vigilant, then gradually strength will come. In the beginning, it seems it is helpless. You are fighting with the wind. But step by step, gradually, strength begins to come. So it is necessary. One should be constantly discriminating. One should be very, very vigilant. That is the negative process. There is positive process. Positive process is spiritual practice. It is said by constant discrimination, just you weaken the evil tendencies of the mind. Because when you constantly know it is wrong, then there is less and less tendency to go, for the mind to go wrong. In the beginning it may not be so, but if you constantly know, if it enters into our subconscious mind, as they say, that this is wrong, then there will come a repulsion. We are constantly repeating these things. So it is. So they say the need for a holy company, and need for a evil, and the danger of evil company. When you are in a good association, when you live with persons who have higher idealism, being constantly with them, you get another kind of atmosphere. From their example, you learn unconsciously. Discrimination comes because you find persons whose life is the embodiment of discrimination, or who are trying constantly to discriminate, who just try to find out whether they are doing the right thing. So when you are in company, in a good company, then discrimination will imbibe the spirit of this discrimination. A man is determined by the company he keeps. When you are in evil company, then other things begin to come. Their valuation is different. If you speak of good things, if you speak of ethical virtues, if you speak of the need for truthfulness, they will say it is foolish thing. In the world you cannot get on. In the world you cannot live if you practice truthfulness. They will say just the opposite. That is not wisdom. They will say foolishness. And so in the Bible it is said that wisdom of the world is foolishness in the eyes of God. But there are persons who try to be foolish in the eyes of the world and wise in the eyes of God. So from them you get the example. An example is better than precept. So it is extremely necessary, they say, to be in good company. And for any reason, if there is good tendencies, then good company comes. What finds its level, own level, and the mind, and a person finds the level of the company of his mind, one finds. So this is negative process, just prevent it, protective thing. But positive thing is practice. It is said by discrimination, just you weaken the tendencies, evil tendencies. And by practice you get something positive. When the evil tendencies has been weakened, then you find it easier. Man has done so many wonderful things. Man cannot control his mind, but man can control a tiger, a lion. I heard in St. Louis, I could not go to see the zoo. In the zoo, they said the show, every Saturday I heard, that how the tame lions and tigers, they play with a person who stands with a whip in his hand. Even a lion, even a tiger is afraid of a human being. But it's a pity that he cannot control his own mind. He cannot keep his own house in order, but he can control the mind of a tiger or of an elephant or a lion. How does he do that? Constant practice. Just imagine the amount of patience, the amount of alertness. If he becomes a little negligent, he'll have to give, he'll pay with his own life for his negligence. But he remains alert, constant alert, and he can do that. If a man can do that, why not these things? If a man can go to the moon, why not man nearer home can control his mind? He does not practice. So there is a need for spiritual practice. In the book of yoga, standard book on yoga, this question was asked. Always this question will be asked. Why the mind is difficult to control. They are the same thing says. Practice and discrimination. And how to practice, that is also important thing. In the beginning one cannot practice. In the beginning one cannot meditate. For that it is necessary you must have a little disciplined life. So in the Gita it is said, a person who does not live a disciplined life will find it very difficult to control his mind. It will be difficult for him. It is almost impossible for him to succeed. If your daily life is wild, uncontrolled, then your mind will be such, you cannot do that. But when you live a controlled life, certain amount of disciplined life, then it will become easier. When first you live a certain amount of disciplined life, regular life, yes, you discriminate what is right and wrong, try to live some degree of ethical life, then it will be easy. When you live a bit controlled life, then if you take proper means, if you take to proper methods, then it will be all right. So one cannot say living a wild life at once you come to go to a yogi how to meditate. So you are not ready for how to meditate. You must pass through the dealing. You must fulfill the qualification. So in the Gita, in the previous chapters, there was description. In the previous chapters, there are many hints. In this chapter also, there is the hint how to control how to live a controlled life. What is meant by controlled life? Life of unselfishness. Work with a spiritual outlook and live a regular life. And when you work with a spiritual outlook, automatically your life will be regular. You cannot live a wild life. You have sense of responsibilities and you have sense of duties, and you do your works with a spiritual motive, with a purpose to cultivate the spirit of the unselfishness. Then naturally life will be regulated. So the Gita emphasizes work should be done, but it should be done with a spiritual outlook. In that way, life will be disciplined. It is the general rule. That is the general rule. If you take care of this, other things will be coming. If you try to live a life of unselfishness, if you want to live a life of dedication to a purpose, then naturally you will have control. You cannot live a wild life. So these are the methods. First thing, to live a disciplined life and to cultivate certain degrees of ethical virtues. I say certain degrees. It is not possible to be perfect. It is not possible to succeed completely in pursuing ethical virtues unaided. There must be other factors necessary, but we can try. If you struggle for living an ethical life, that is enough to a certain extent. Then if you are ready, then you can do practice. It will be easy for you to practice and succeed in meditation. In the previous verses it was given how to meditate. When the mind goes on, try to bring the mind to the object of meditation. That's a simple method. But it will not come all at once. It will not come all at once. You have to do it for a long time. You have to do it for a whole life. If the purpose of meditation life is to realize truth, realize what is beyond mind, what is beyond the finite world, that means success in meditation. The mind becomes so calm, then the mysteries of the world are broken. The nature reveals the mystery of existence to you. That is a complete success. when the mind becomes perfectly controlled. When the mind becomes perfectly calm, truth reveals itself, because truth is within us. Patanjali says what is meant by control of the mind. Mind is like the surface of an ocean or a lake. There are always waves. Waves represent the thoughts. Waves are small, waves are large, as high as a mountain, as they say, mountain high waves. And when the ripples, when the lake, surface of the lake becomes completely calm, then the sun or the moon is reflected therein. In the same way, when the mind becomes perfectly calm, then other thoughts do not come in, and the truth within you is reflected. You directly see that thing. Other thoughts represent all your thoughts coming out of desires of your likings or dislikes. What happens when you when you try to meditate? When you try to meditate, you will find how turbulent the mind is. Turbulent, it takes you forcibly to wrong direction, like a wild horse which has not been trained. And if the rider is also inexperienced, then you can consider what will be the result. So here, Bhagavad Arjuna said the word. The mind is turbulent. Not only turbulent, mind is strong. If it does not go wrong way, you cannot control it. It is so strong. And it is obstinate. It again comes. You bring the mind to the object of meditation, it again goes. You do not know how it has escaped your control. So the mind is obstinate, like an octopus. It is like the water hyacinth. Just you remove them, they come again. Just like says on the surface of the water. You remove, it comes. Invariably, it will come. Constant struggle goes on that way. So this is the condition of the mind. So naturally, it is a matter of long practice. Even to just get into the spirit of meditation, it will take time. These things are told not to frighten people, just to know what it is. You cannot become a scholar all at once. But ordinary people will be ready to pay a proper price for any worldly success. But to come to spiritual things or meditation at once, even before they get the direction, because it is so difficult. One gets annoyed, it is so difficult. It will become easy for you. You can get your meditation, you can get your samadhi in your deep sleep. So that it is senseless thing. That means you do not want it. If you really want it, you will be ready to pay the price. So the Gita says these things. It is difficult to do, but not that it is completely difficult. It is within human reach. Many persons have done it, but for that you must be ready to practice. You must not get impatient. It will require time. The tree takes time to grow from a tiny seed, but from a tiny seed there a big oak tree grows. In the same way, out of a tiny little instruction, following that instruction, as a big tree grows, spiritual life, when man, a finite being, becomes the infinite, gets the knowledge of the infinite. Mind is difficult to control, much more difficult to control than blowing wind, but that also has been done. Not that all persons have to struggle that way, or even in the early days they had struggled. Afterwards they find it is easy. As one Swami Sharadananda, who has written that famous book, Sri Ramakrishna, the great master, he was asked by a Swami, who told me directly, that I asked him. He asked Swami Sharadananda, how does your mind behave? Does it behave like ours, so much struggle? And he said, no. As soon as I sit, my mind just finds easy, mind becomes calm, he said. So afterwards, man succeeds. One example is sufficient, that it can be controlled. Actually, I give this example because it's tangible. It was said by a person whom we saw, and I heard from a person who asked that question directly. He said, no, at once you find my mind does not give me trouble. I don't know what happened in his early days, but at a period in his later days, he said these things. One asked him, how long would you be meditating when you are ill, when you are living exclusively meditative life? He said, not that I would be meditating for a long time, but the fact was that when I would meditate even for 4 or 5 hours, I would get so much out of it that its effect would continue. So whole day we could be in that condition. Such things happen. We find illustrations from the lives of saints. We find illustrations from the lives of those who wrote these things. They know the subtleties of mind so much. They describe all the intricacies of the mind, what happens. And they say if you follow the spiritual practice persistently, then it can be controlled. It becomes difficult in the beginning, but gradually it becomes easier and easier. Any difficult task becomes easy and becomes easier as you continue the spiritual practice. So it is two things are necessary: discrimination and spiritual practice. And for that also there are helps if one will continue. At once one cannot meditate from easier to higher things. To control the mind practice is one thing is very easy. Anyone can do that. To repeat the prayer or for the repetition of the name. It is so easy and the effect is so surprising. Very few can meditate. It is a fact. We may say, let us sit and meditate. We shall meditate. Very few can meditate. They are not ready for it. Their mind is not ready for it. That does not mean there is no hope for them. It is the condition of all undisciplined minds. For ordinary person, it will be difficult to meditate all at once. What is the law of concentration? You must have interest first. If you cannot have any interest, you will never get any concentration. For any subject you go to study, interest must awaken. So in spiritual life, for meditation also, first the interest must awaken. To get meditation, many things are necessary. Study is necessary. Study of scriptures, the mind gets interested. Study of scriptures, you read about spiritual truths, about spiritual experiences. The mind gets interested. The mind begins to believe that these are true. Even if you study with your reason, being alert. Not that one has to believe at once. Even if you believe, you try to understand in your own ways, keeping an open mind. Rationalism does not mean irrational arguments. You must keep an open mind just to see what is the truth. If you come, even if you study scriptures in that way, and if you study long enough, if you think about the contents of the scriptures long enough, you will get the inner spirit, inner meaning will find. This will help you. It is said from scriptures you will get one meaning when you study them intellectually. You will get another meaning when you study the scriptures. You get help for your spiritual life, to know what is spiritual life, to know how one succeeds in spiritual life, how in the past saints succeeded. These things we find from the scriptures. Without any initial longing for spiritual life, we do not get these meanings. Subtleties of the scriptures we do not understand unless we do spiritual practice. These are the guide things. These are the musical notations. But you cannot appreciate the musical notations if you cannot, your fingers do not move according to the notations. But if you do practice, then you find notations are so beautiful. It might be after seeing the notations, you will find great joy. So in the same way, the scriptures are notations, but notations are not music. So you must put them into practice. You try to put them into practice, then you will find how beautiful, how deep are the meaning of the scriptures. In different ways you should practice. And for all the sales, then the mind will be trained. Then it will be easy for you to meditate. Let us stop here. Anybody is welcome to ask any question.